Hi, and welcome to another edition of Meet the Author. We've got a great conversation in store for you today, and I'm just going to hand it right over to my co-host, Gary Wong. Gary, take it away.
Thanks, Tamara. Wow, we got a really good audience out here today here. So like one of the fun things we can do, since this will be a fun session, it's Karsten after all. We want you to go in the chat and just type in there, what are you eating right now? Because I think we've got people all around the world here. So are you having breakfast? Are you having lunch? Are you having wine with your dinner? Just let us know. It's kind of a fun thing. Oh, pork scratchings. That sounds kind of cool. Okay, thanks for that. Well, I have the honor, really pleased to introduce somebody that doesn't need any introduction, Karsten Busch. Karsten has written several books here, and what we're here today for the next hour is talking about his latest book. And his latest book is called Preventing Industrial Accidents, Reappraising H.W. Heinrich, More Than Triangles and Dominoes. So welcome, Karsten.
Thank you. And thank to everyone for turning up. It's really humbling to see such an audience.
It's great. So I've got some questions that I prepared for Karsten, but this is one of these interactive shows that Tamara kind of is in the background watching it here. Any comments you put on chat, she's going to look at it too. And it's not a conversation just between myself and Karsten. We invite people. Maybe you put up your hand or let Rosa or Tamara know that you've got a comment to make, and we'll let you join in the fun as well. Okay. So best thing to do right now, if everybody can put yourself on mute, then we don't get the background noise of dogs barking and whatever. In my case here, the garbage man may be coming soon. So we could do that. I'm going to start off by just asking Karsten, what made you decide to write this book? Is there a need that you're trying to fulfill here?
Yeah, I could say I'm very egoistic because I tend to write books that I would like to read myself, and nobody else does them. But let me just go back to when I started being interested in Heinrich's work, because I think that's when it really started for this book, and that's about 10 years ago, I think. And I came in several discussion groups where there was a lot of discussion on safety forums, where there was a lot of discussion on Heinrich's work, and it was wrong, and it was bad, and it was the Holy Grail, and whatever. And I realized one thing, and that's most of these people discussing Heinrich, they didn't read Heinrich at all. They hadn't read his work. I happened to have two of his books in the bookshelf, and I hadn't read them either at that point. And I decided now it's time to take them out. So I did. I started and read them, back to end, both. I made some summaries for my own use. And that got me thinking, because one thing was people were discussing him and his work without actually knowing what he said, why he said it, etc. And there were some things that made me curious, like the seeming focus on direct causes in his domino model. And then I wanted to have some more, and I started to study him a bit better and his background, and it turned into a thesis. And then I thought maybe it would be good to have a book, because Heinrich's work, it's hard to find. His books are out of print, the last edition, which isn't a very good one if you want to know about Heinrich himself. It's from 1980. And after that, he went out of print. His papers are hard to find. Some are on the internet. And I thought it would be good to just present to the younger audience an overview of what did he do, and also, out of my curiosity, why did he write the things he wrote? What were his influences, and how did he get to what he, well, left to the world? So that's, yeah, I think it was a quite natural progression over time, and of course it is when you look at it with hindsight. So that's a bit about why I chose to write a book at some point.
Yeah, I was kind of introduced it because somebody told me, like, I think it was 1933 when he wrote kind of like the very first safety manual at the time, and that became the Bible for us carrying forward here. But I understand that he's not a psychologist or an insurance guy, but he's an engineer.
He worked for insurance, so he was an insurance guy, of course, but he started as an engineer, and he started from a very humble blue-collar background. He was the child to German immigrants to Vermont, I think. And well, he had a grammar school, and then at the age of 13 or something, he started working and worked his way up. Engineering, he was in the Navy, he sailed on well, ships, and ended up in tool making. And after he met someone who convinced him you should come to work for Travelers, he did in 1913, I think, if I recall well. And then he stayed there and did a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. Rosa, go ahead.
Yeah. Carsten, why do you think his work fell into such disrepute? Because I remember all of a sudden I started seeing a lot of articles about how his work was incorrect and we had been misinterpreting it.
Yeah, I think one of the things is we have been misinterpreting it, and then we attribute the stuff we are stuck with now to where it originated. So I think that's one thing. I also think there are several factors, but one other factor is, as I argue mostly in my thesis, that when the new view came, they needed something to contrast themselves to, and well, Heinrich was a good example, or how the old view of safety was, and I think that's one part of it. And you see that new ideas are coming, or repackaging of new ideas, and it's not restricted to any view, but that they will say, well, look at this old stuff, and what we have is new, it's better, it's Okay. I think that's one part of it, and a lot of poor interpretations and poor implementations.
Good.
Yeah, and also then the association with behavior-based safety, which got a bad rep for several reasons, and which also suffers from the same fate, I think. That gets a lot of criticism because of bad implementations, most of all, not because the thinking is necessarily bad.
Yeah, I've had that experience as well in a different field, where I got to be a certified trainer for Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is great. But over time, you can see some consultants get a little kind of creative. Next thing you know, there's they create, oh, you want another habit? Oh, sure, I can give you another habit. And there's the 8th habit, the 9th habit here. And then Covey kind of says there, I think they're kind of like meandering beyond what I originally wrote. So let's go back to the principles. I think that's what's happened to a lot of the stuff that started off really well based on principles. So in some cases, when I read the book here, you were telling me more than triangles and dominoes. Let's get back to the principles of safety and kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think it's very correct what you say. If there is a popular or an intuitive, appealing idea, people will take it and will make it to their own. and that's actually a good thing because people are creative and people should adapt stuff. The problem is, I think, when it gets too shallow. And when you take Covey's 7 principles and you only look at the headlines and not because he wrote a thick book about it, so that there's much more richness to the message than just the 7 headlines. And it's the same with Heinrich. It's the same with the Swiss cheese model. It's much more than just a fancy drawing that, well, we can make our own story into. But there is a thought behind, there's a philosophy behind, or at least some deeper thoughts. And then at some point you have to step back and look what's really here.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, as a practitioner, maybe some other folks will speak up. I know that, when you're explaining things to people out in the workforce, I tend to simplify because they're not interested in the theory or the principles. And I did it a lot more when I was younger than I do now. But that was, as a practitioner, I found myself doing that quite a bit. So what is the essence of Heinrich that is true and that we should reconsider?
Oh dear, that's a hard question. I don't know if it's easy to reduce his work to an essence, because it's 40 years. But one of the things that is quite essential in his work, if you take it to an abstract level, is actually what you are saying, that you have to make stuff practical and translate it to your audience. And his main audience were managers, and well, after that only safety people and workers. He spoke mostly to managers. He was a management consultant, more than actually a safety guy, I would say. And he was really good taking some easy principles about making things safer and translating them into 3-4 bullet point list. This is how you should work. A bit like when we are saying now, plan, do, check, act. That's how you should structure your work. He had also this kind of lists, like you have to have the will to do something, then you have to find the facts, then you have to determine where is your problem, and then you have to set some actions and follow them up. So it's kind of plan, do, check, act, in other words. And I think that's his essence. And then he built some, or he didn't build, he found some really nice, catchy, metaphors, models, ratios, etc., to sell and anchor in his principles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I found actually the last chapter in your book the most interesting one, and this is where you entitled it Heinrich in the 21st Century, where you write about his relevance in today's safety science and practice. What reflections can you share when you wrote that chapter?
Oh dear, it's a heavily revised and rewritten chapter, I must say. But one that I found really important, because there are a lot of people saying, well, all these old guys from way back, why should we spend time on them? Well, they're models. We've used them. They've had their use. Let's just bury them. And especially because they're so abused and wrongly interpreted, let's just forget about it. And I think there are several reasons for not doing that. And I'd like to quote Carl Weick for one reason, and I have written it down here. He says in his book, Organizational Sense Making from 95, part of a professional development consists of cultivating an appreciation of historical roots of current issues, questions, and concepts. I think if you want to understand really what you're doing, you have to look back and understand where do we come from. History does matter, context does matter, and context comes from the history, the stuff we've done before, and how things have developed. So I think that that's one important reason why we as a safety profession actually should look back also to the beginnings, even though the situation may be quite different. At the same time, while factories and workplaces may be very different, people are still people. And even though we now have smartphones glued to our hands and, well, we are perhaps easily distracted, we are still human in much. So we are not that different. So a lot may still apply. We just have to review it critically. And then I think, well, I don't know if you've heard about what's called the Lindy effect. Nassim Taleb talks about it. He says if there are non-perishable things like ideas, you can more or less predict how long they will be here by looking at how long they've been here before. So I don't think that Heinrich and his work will go away anytime soon, even if we want to. It's been around for 80 years. Best prediction is it will be around for another 80 years, at least. Old stuff that has survived until today has proven some value and has at least proven a lot of resilience surviving, for good and for bad, because there are really bad ideas around also, of course. Yeah. I'm not saying that survival is a good thing per se for ideas. So I think we have to realize that and, well, just accept, okay, we have this, and it will probably be a benchmark for traditional safety in decades to come. So let's engage with it with an open and critical mind, not just throw it away and think, well, that's old stuff. We don't need to look at it. Let's review it and see what value there is still. And I think there is value because Heinrich spoke about stuff that is still interesting today and still very relevant today. He spoke a lot about how do you convince managers. He spoke about the tension between commerce, money, investments, and safety, which costs money. He spoke about human behavior, and maybe we don't like his view or what people have made from his view, but it's relevant. He spoke about practical solutions for safety issues. So I think there is a lot there that we still have to take into account.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I find that's usually very controversial on LinkedIn is that people get annoyed when somebody reinterprets what's been researched before or what's been spoken about before. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that, but they'll say, well, that's nothing new. That's already been discussed. There's nothing new about the new safety. Everything they're doing is a rehash. So I think I pretty much agree that a lot of these, like Heinrich is a good example of some very wise and good research that has been done, but it fades away into the background, and then somebody comes forward with a new way of saying it. Would you agree, Carson? Is he reconstituted in some way? Is he showing up in some way now?
Yeah, the whole serious injuries and fatality stuff is just taking a little sliver of Heinrich, saying Heinrich had it wrong and we are having it right. That's pure Heinrich, just repackaged and with a little bit of strawman added, I would say. But
So
I yeah, I storm an argument. Well, that I'm not going to discuss the triangle now.
Now, I did want to let everybody know that this is an engaging conversation. So if you have some thoughts that you want to share, let's use the raise hand reaction so that Rosa or Gary or Carson even know to bring you into the conversation, because we want to hear from everybody and see what people are thinking.
Well, there's a lot of action in the chat, Tamara. Have you noticed anything that you want to bring up?
Yeah, I can't keep up because I have to speak, so I just
Yeah,
see
right.
stuff popping up there. But Rosa, I think you said something really interesting about this this issue of people saying, well, that this is not new. Everything that Decker or Holnagel says, and safety too. Well, we had that years ago, and Deming and whatever. But it just gave me a thought, and I haven't thought this through, but there's this phenomenon of distancing by different thing that you say, but that doesn't apply to me because I'm different, or we are different, my situation is different. But it sounds almost as if there is also a phenomenon of distancing by saying, well, this is what we always did. Taking some shallow resemblances and then saying, well, we don't have to look into safety 2, for example, because we are doing this already.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. It's one of the cognitive biases that we have, but we don't realize. It's called a fundamental attribution error. Like, I'm okay, but there's something wrong with you. It was good. It was good work in my hand, but for you, you were just lucky. So we have that, and that's one of the biases that we need to be aware of here. I really enjoyed one of your first books, of course, was your safety myths book, because again, it was provocative. Maybe stop and rethink about all these things that I've been carrying forward and sharing out, and realize like, oh my God, am I really doing good stuff or not? One of the comments in the chats is about local rationality. So I want to move over there.
Yes.
I think it's really important.
Who mentioned that, Gary? Can we bring
there's a few
Mike?
people. Tanya's on there as well.
Okay, well, let's get some more people in here, right?
Herbert Simon in 1955, he was an early critic of the idea that people have unlimited information processing capabilities. There was that thought is that people were just like computers. We could retrieve and store information very quickly. So Simon came up with the term bounded rationality to describe a much more realistic concept. Then David Woods extended that into local rationality. You talk a lot about local rationality in your book because it really applies to Heinrich. So at this point here, I'd like you to kind of introduce that, and maybe Tanya and you guys can talk a bit about that more. It's we don't know what happened back in 1933 because we live in 2021. Why is it different then?
Yes, I don't even remember if I discuss local rationality that much in my book, but I use it as the main lens in my thesis that looks on Heinrich's work and New View, how they discuss Heinrich. And if I do a presentation about my thesis, I tend to say you can't forget everything I tell you about Heinrich and what he did or what he didn't do, as long as you please remember this concept of local rationality, because it's so immensely powerful and important, especially for safety people, I think. To make sense of, or it can help them to make sense of situations afterwards when something happened. But I think also in ordinary life, it will help you and give you a lot of peace of mind, I would say, if you just try to step in someone else's shoes and think, well, oh, this looks stupid to me, but why does it make sense to him? As an example from, well, I think any organization, I speak to people on the work floor, And we'll often say, well, those guys in the head office, they don't understand me. It's like they're living in a different world. And I say, yes, you are completely right. They are. I work for the Norwegian police, and police officers, they're out in the street, and well, they handle situations and deal with people. And then you have the police commissioner. She sits up in the office a few floors above me, and her reality isn't out in the street. Her reality is in the political scene, dealing with budgets. It's another world, and if you have the realization, I think you can be at much more ease with all this stuff you don't understand. And then there's of course the challenge to get the two worlds together, bridge that gap in some way. And you will never bring one into the other world, but you can at least, well, try to give them some shared understanding of their problems up and down. And yeah, I think Anders is going to say something. Hi, Anders.
Anders, please unmute yourself and join the conversation. Oh, there you are.
Hi, Carsten. I haven't read your book yet. I hope to do it soon. I'm thinking that you say that Heinrich is out of print, so it's difficult to find his books. So if you want to get to know him and understand him better, what is the way to do it? Find old secondhand books somewhere, or reading your book? Will reading your book get me to know Heinrich better?
This is very tempting to say yes. It's going to be a yes, but I will always urge people to find primary sources. But it's difficult. It really is. Heinrich's work is out of print. Originals are really hard to get. Myself, I'm still looking for a first print, for example, the 31 version. So it's sometimes it's near impossible to do so. On my website, I've started to establish a little Heinrich space, I want to call it, where I at least share all the documents that are legally available. From Heinrich. There are some sources in various databases that are available online and for free. So you can find some there. And then, well, my book, yes, of course, I will recommend reading it, because I have tried to base myself as much as possible on original text. There are a lot of quotes where relevant. And I try also to put the various quotes and subjects into their historical context. Like when I discuss how did Heinrich deal with unsafe acts, what did he write, I will put it into the background of what was the common thinking in the time, and also add some critique to it.
Thank you very much. I see some of the quotes you have put on LinkedIn and so on. So you do get interested, and you do realize that there is more to it than what you get in other places. So I will have a look at your webpage, and I will have a look at your book. Thank you.
And James was also wanting to say something too, so bring him in.
James?
Hi, Carsten, Rosa, Gary, hope you're well.
Hi, my friend.
Twofold question for you. First question is it likely that we'll be having this same conversation in the one that you have about Heinrich, Carsten, with Safety 2, HOP, and the like in 10, 20 years? And if so, how do we kind of probably stop that now, or reduce the likelihood of that now?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I think in one of the drafts of my thesis, I actually ended with these questions. are we going to discuss Decker and Holnagel 80 years from now? How are we going to speak about them then? Well, none of us will be there, so we'll never know unless we get our hands on a TARDIS or something. But I think one thing that we should really work hard for, and I know you've done some work in that direction, James, is that we should put an end to this tribalism in the profession, because that's really not helpful. And I think that just makes the problem bigger, that, well, that you get these really extreme reactions and papers and quarrels on LinkedIn and so on, which are so unnecessary, because we should be in for the same issue. So I love the way I don't know when you did it. Did you do it in our session where you discussed the buffet that you pick from? I think that's a beautiful metaphor.
Probably,
Yeah,
probably did.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful metaphor. We have this buffet of various tools that we can pick from, and or well, probably before you joined, Bruce was discussing his awesome spice rack. You have all these various spices, and you use what suits the situation, and you can make some really brilliant mixes for the specific use. So I think that's something we should strive for, and there's a bit of old, a bit of new, and a bit of blue, and whatever. Question 2.
Anybody else? Okay, we're in the last half of our session here.
So Gary, Rob put his hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, Karsten, we haven't read I haven't read your book yet. It's very new, but talking about icebergs, could you reveal maybe a few things about the interesting findings you've had in this research you did? Because the Heinrich stuff it goes back a long time. You've done a lot of research. It's probably defined in your book, but are you prepared to reveal some of the findings you've had?
About the iceberg, did I understand you right?
Well, no, it's just like a metaphor, since it's Heinrich is the iceberg principle. But obviously, you've done so much research. Could you reveal some of your findings that may be different than the learnings we've had, let's say, from the 20, 30 years ago about Heinrich?
Well, one of the things that has struck me the last years studying his work, and especially in relation to the safety triangle, which has gotten some wrong interpretations, and it's seen as a metric. It's seen as something predictive, and so on. It's seen as something that should give a stable ratio for which is universally applicable. None of that is Heinrich. That's all stuff that came afterwards, and people put their own meaning to it, which can be okay, but it's not as intended, and it doesn't work that way anyway. The one thing I liked best about when Heinrich writes about it, he talks about opportunities. And I find that such a beautiful word when he says, well, there's the situation, and you realize it could have been worse. That isn't something, there isn't a metric or whatever, but it's an opportunity to do something. And that I found really, really beautiful and insightful. Well, at that time it was also really groundbreaking. There's little in Heinrich's work that it's uniquely to him, because most of his models, his metaphors, and all the stuff he tells is it was already around at the time. What he did was just put it into a good framework. He presented it in an understandable way. He put it together that it became a complete package and not just some safety actions. But what he added, what was mostly his own, I would say, is the thinking about here is stuff that could have been birthed. We could have done something about this before. There are opportunities. You do not have to wait for people to get hurt to take action. You can be proactive. I think that's his main contribution, unique contribution to safety. And that's, yeah, I like that. And then the interesting thing is you see almost the same words coming back now from Holnagel when he speaks about learning opportunities in his, not his last book, but the one before. He has this diagram, and he even has a tilted triangle in there if you want to see it.
So I was seeing that Gordon had his hand up. Did you have a question or a comment, Gordon?
Yeah, just a comment. I haven't had a chance, Carsten, to read your book yet. I'm in the middle of a learning teams one by Brent Sutton that I just purchased, and I just finished a Holnagel one. So I'm on this path of learning, more about what the academics are doing on the side of health and safety. I always consider myself a person that got to live it at the sharp end or at the front line. But the one comment that I would have is that I don't think there's any shortage of understanding of how to work safe. I don't believe there is from an academic point, and I don't believe there is from a frontline worker point. I think we completely understand how to work safe in most cases. What I would say is society really committed to valuing the work or the products that are being produced and the people that are producing them, so to speak. So an example is we have the Boeing crashes of the 737 MAX. This is across the world. There's been, disdain for Boeing. Boeing put billions of dollars into correcting this particular issue. And we're now a year and a half, almost 2 years into before they're going to be flying again, or they're recently flying. But when we look at construction, we look at mining, we look at logging, we look at fishing, we look at marine transport, all of these various things, we don't tend to kill people 180 at a time. And it certainly doesn't affect the public, it affects the workforce. And to me, this is we will be talking about this in 20 years and 30 years. Until society says it's like cigarettes. We know what causes cancer, and until there is enough outrage, we will not see all these theories come into play at a rate where we will see a significant drop in health and safety deaths. That's my little spin this morning, but I'd love to hear your comments on societal buy-in to to health and safety. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, I'm not sure that there wasn't a real question there, I think. Okay, so I didn't miss it, but I like your reflection on the societal bit and how does society value and actually push us forward or push us back or whatever they want to do. And maybe a little reflection from mine. A few years ago, I did a presentation on some safety myth at a Dutch conference, I think it was. And there was a little sequence about safety as a choice. Is safety a choice? Because that's some people who claim that it's mostly a choice. And what I did was to show the audience a picture of a little boy, 5-6 years old, I guess in Vietnam, in a workshop that I had found on internet. And then I asked them to reflect on that picture, because is safety a choice? Is working under terrible circumstances, but what other choice does this kid have? And then there's the question, why does this kid have these choices, or doesn't he have these choices? And I think that that's back to us, because we like to buy our t-shirts for $4 a piece, and not for $50 a piece. So who's really to blame for unsafety? It's not the poor little guy on the sharp end. Yes, it's a bit about the people, the sweatshop owner, of course. It's the company, but we are on the other end, society. We want cheap products. We want cheap flights also, because, well, flying around to the USA or another place, it used to be a luxury when I was young. Now you get, well, Ryanair, you pay more for your suitcase than for your seat. When we will be flying again, which, well, whenever that is. Not going to do. Yeah.
Bill Stetner, you wanted to make a comment? Just unmute yourself.
Why, yes. Who would have thought Bill wants to talk? So one of the things that I see on a daily basis, Karsten, is if most companies have a rule how much you can lift, right? So if we see a worker lifting 30 pounds more than they're allowed to lift, everyone is up in arms and wants something done about it. But no one is interested in solving the problem of the purchasing agent who's purchasing items that weigh too much for one person to carry and are not able to be carried by two, right? I found a mag drill that weighs 180 pounds in a box that has two handles, right? And it's labeled 180 pounds on it. So why did someone purchase that, and why aren't we up in arms about the purchasing of that item? And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's upstream.
Yeah, good point.
I would say, yeah.
Yeah, Lars, you got your hand up. Would you like to make a comment? Oh, yeah, unmute yourself now. Here you go.
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated. Hi, congratulations, Karsten. I'm so proud to know a real author. Thank you. I was wondering about the title, Preventing Industrial Accidents. Is it me over reading it, or is it a real statement with putting the words around from Heinrich earlier works?
Yeah, you're completely right. My first title is actually the subtitle. I wanted to do something with a Heinrich more than triangles and dominoes, because I wanted to show the full spectrum. People only know the dominoes and the triangle, and then, well, they know he was a big bad guy back in time, because that's what I heard. And besides, he said a lot of bad stuff about people making errors. So that was my intention with the title, but the publisher wanted something a bit drier and more serious. So we landed on a compromise, and I thought it might be fun just to play with the title of his best-known book, Industrial Accident Prevention. And I turned it around and said, well, preventing industrial accidents, because that's what Heinrich tried to do. And then we added luckily they agreed to my subtitle.
Okay, but are you maybe making a statement now that we have been misusing the book? So we have been causing industrial accidents now since 50 years.
No, I won't say that. The book doesn't make any of those suggestions.
Okay, interesting. A great job. Thank you.
Yeah, Lars, my wife is standing here. She says hello.
Yeah. Hello.
On the chat panel, I introduced a question a bit about safety science because just extending on what Carsten says, it's more than just triangle and dominoes. And Carsten had this wonderful talk a bit about safety science itself. So I'd like to just kind of open that up there and just hear people's comments. Safety science, and in Sidney Decker's book, he talked about that. It's not a natural science like physics, chemistry, or biology. It's a social science. That studies relationships and roles and individuals and systems here. Social sciences like psychology, they still suffer from this replication crisis that started 10 years ago. And if you're not familiar with the replication crisis, it's this thing is that you can't go back and repeat the experiment that you did originally. That's the problem with the Hawthorne effect. You can't go back and do another Hawthorne effect today. So my question out to everybody is, what's your thoughts about the credibility of safety science? Do we risk pseudoscience issues with correlation versus causation problems here? What research do you see? And there's a lot of safety science if you're on their website that comes out here. How do we know whether to believe it or not to believe it? Just because it happened to 2 or 3 people or companies, can we actually extend and say it's going to happen everywhere? So I throw that open to anybody that wants to talk about that.
May I ask an underlying question, Gary?
Sure.
As I look at who's present here, I wonder how many people are actually practicing safety and working at the sharp end, either as a consultant or as a safety professional. Okay, I see a couple of hands up. Good, because James, good. Bill is like trying to, yes, because I'm wondering what attracts you to this discussion, okay? Because you are practitioners and you are interested in safety science, or you wouldn't be here. What attracts you to this discussion? Because your average safety professional would not be interested in engaging at this level. Mike, are you speaking? Oh, I thought you were talking, Mike Phillips. Anybody have any comment on that?
I might share my my rationale for attending today. I'm a consultant, and I'm often brought in at senior levels in the organization to look at operations that are not affecting, where there's some opportunity to improve. And one can't really kind of distill it down to any one part of the organization that might be at fault. Looking at it systemically, safety would always would be something one would have to consider. And particularly when you're looking at preventative measures by adopting something that will prevent something bad from happening. When you're preventing something bad from happening, it's very hard to capture an economic return or a return on investment. And the more frequently that happens, or the more distance occurs between when you implement something, people forget why they did things, and then they stop doing it. So there is a cost associated with that, an economic cost. It requires capital, and if you can't see a return on that, and you can look for examples all over the place with that. So why am I'm going to invest in something with that promises something that I will never be able to measure because it prevents something bad from happening?
Measuring the unmeasurable.
And then the people that are responsible for funding something like that are so far removed from that pointy edge of the spear that they're reluctant to invest in that. So you can have the who was an engineer, the launch commander for the, I worked at NASA after the Columbia shuttle disaster. To this day, he will say he made the right call, that there wasn't enough information about the danger inherent in the foam coming off and perhaps impacting on the shuttle, because it happened on every launch. So that that acceptance of deviation, he said he would make the same decision today, because they had an economic crisis that was facing them. Congress and the American public had lost. The enamour had gone under the space project. So we now need to be an economic entity that's predictable, that can launch. So the notion that they would scrub that launch, or with the O-ring again, it happened in 2 occasions when the engineers knew absolutely that there was the danger was huge. So I'm always interested to hear what you have to say. How do I go back and make a case?
So you use the safety science to help you make the case.
Yeah, the science doesn't cut it. What I need is a death. I need someone who loses their hand. I have to take people down to the place, and this has happened. I'm in a first world democracy here in Canada, and 100 kilometers from here, a woman lost her hand in the most archaic factory, where the probability of that happening was so obvious to anyone who just walked in off the street.
So Carson, what are your thoughts on this?
There's 2 people that raised their hand, Tamara.
I saw that. I just want to get Carson's thoughts.
Okay, but perhaps Anders and James are much smarter than me. But I'll give it a little shot at least. One of the things, sorry, I forgot your name. It was Mike. This is one of the things that Heinrich actually wrote about, and that was his breakthrough also as a wanted safety professional, and his timing was perfect, such to say, because he published right before the big crisis of 28, 29, and then he kept going. He addressed the financial thing. And he gave people and managers, he gave them a number to present some return of investment, and that number is wrong, and it depends, of course, on the situation and all that, and it discounts a lot of stuff. But he was really good in finding some ways to convince people and persuade them to do something because of various reasons, moral, humanitarian, financial, and then he had these ways of telling them, and you can actually do something about it. You should. It pays back, and you can actually do this because you can manage your organization, and if you can do that, you can also manage safety, because the principles are pretty much alike, and there's some different tools, but he connected, which is something that now the new view people, Decker, Holnagel, Safety 2 and Safety Differently also do. He connected the primary process, the ordinary work to and leadership to safety, and he says this is the same thing actually you should be doing. So just take into account also these other objectives. And now I shut up and give the floor to Anders or James.
Thank you, Carson. So yeah, if you want to speak, do please use the raise hand so I can see it on the board, because there's too many cameras here. Gordon, I had seen you before. If you still have a question, can you come on, Mike? Because you raised your hand about 10 minutes ago. And then we'll go to James and Anders.
All right, thanks. Cheers, Tamara. You were talking about this Gordon, yeah? Because there is 2 Gordons, and yeah, I was more aligned with the other Gordon. I wanted to follow after Gordon number 1. And I'd be quite happy to be Gordon number 2. And it was on the basis when you mentioned about those at the sharp end or who were practitioners. I think it was Rosa actually that raised that one. Cheers, Rosa. Why would we be bothered in the science and all that? I guess I'm just one of those weirdos that flip-flops both ways. I've done a bit of academic work with it. I join in with you guys when I can. And yeah, I'm at the sharp end at critical infrastructure in the marine construction. So across oil and gas, which Carsten has written about in the past, and renewables and large scale environmental. But I see it like a couple of the gentlemen actually have mentioned before, being a social science. So I'm in it for the social bit. It's about people. And the way I look at it really is that because the humans involved, immediately you're in a whole world of hurt. If it was all robots, everything was linear, you wanted to do something, the robot did it, you carry on, life would be simple. But it's not, it involves people, and people, humankind are complex. So for those that are chasing a dollar, and of course energy is one of them, and like Carsten mentioned about wanting a $4 t-shirt off the back of a 10 cents child that's doing it in a sweatshop, energy is not a lot different when you think about it. Everyone wants the cheap energy. So we go out there and rape the seabed and run around getting hydrocarbons everywhere. And in latter years, we're now doing it with wind, but we're still mixing it up with the environment out there in the oceans with all our structures. But at the end of the day, people want energy. They want the lights to go on. So in the middle of that is people that are sent out there. And I like the bit like Carsten was saying about, you know, do you have a choice when it comes to safety? And as we know from Piper Alpha through to Macondo, BP Horizon, there are choices, and unfortunately some people make the wrong choice, and events like that happen. So I see myself as not a crusader, but one of those guys that's in the middle of that pipeline of events in a leadership position. And if I can make a difference, I'm damn sure I'm going to use my voice or my feet and try and make those differences. And a lot of it is not because everyone out there is an idiot and we have to tell them what to do. And if they don't wear the hard hat and walk around with a clipboard, so I try and stamp that out all the time. It's more to do with communications. And as we are humans, we are complex, we are different, and we all do things differently. We have a different reality, different cultures, and a different worldview. When you have international workforces that are out there at the sharp end, as you guys refer to it, I like to think that I'm going to take each and one of those guys or girls back home alive at the end of the day. So by taking all these opinions, whether they're critical or other people, and the variations about the old safety and new safety, sometimes I come in and I see Carsten on LinkedIn and he's putting people in their place, and I just love it. It's a crack. It's fantastic. And I think if people stopped arguing about which was the right way or the wrong way and actually got back to basics of what are we there and what are we doing, we're actually trying to keep people alive. And it's not through the lowly blue collar guy, you know, being an idiot or not having enough training, or he didn't do his ticking his tick box or something. That's not going to keep people alive. It's going to be people in leadership positions that get out on the deck, make a difference, talk to people, find out what's going on. And like one gentleman said about, you know, why does the designer or the logistic people bring in a 180-pound bit of kit and only put 2 handles on it and say, you know, this is all right? There's a whole world of that going on all the time. It really doesn't matter how you go about it. So there'll be circumstances where some people don't have a choice. They've been given this bit of kit. They've got to rig it up. They've got to make it work. And there's a whole heap of pressure behind them to actually achieve that. So
Thank you, Gordon.
I'm like that little pressure valve in the middle, making sure that what we do is correct as best we can, and relieve the pressure from some of these people that are under pressure to perform in weird and wonderful ways, and iron things out before they do go wrong. And I can only do that if I listen to great guys and girls like you that have all varying experiences and differences.
Thank you, Gordon. That was great. I want to invite James on. James, you wanted to share something?
Well, I was just going to answer my opinion of Rosa's question. I can only really comment for the UK, because unfortunately that's the only place I've worked. But in my experience, Rosa, to answer your question, I just kind of reached the end of the tools that I had. I'd kind of used as many of the ACOPs and the kind of general guidance and practices that I was taught in safety, and came to a point where what people perceived my job was didn't really reflect what I thought my job was, and thought there's got to be something else out there I was disappointed to find that there was something else out there, because I thought I had the monopoly and I thought I was going to be really rich. Turned out I was way off base, and there's loads of really intelligent people out there already talking about this. But yeah, that for me was why I kind of start looking at this space, is because science is always the kind of forefront of whatever's next, and I felt like I'd had enough of what was there and what was available to me, so I needed something else.
Oh. So do you find that you're able to hear, for example, let's talk about Karsten's book, like what have you gleaned from something from this discussion that you think might apply to the sharp end?
Well, I actually missed the beginning of this chat, unfortunately, but I was very lucky to have about an hour of Carsten's time just chatting to him one-on-one. So I'll kind of talk about what I learned from him there. I first time I heard Carsten, my mind was just blown a little bit, if I'm honest. But then after that, and we spoke to him more in depth, that local rationality piece for me was a game changer. An absolute game changer, something that maybe I already knew and maybe already did, but hearing it from somebody else, then you just go, oh yeah, that's so important. And my grandma always used to say, put yourself in someone else's shoes, and that's essentially what he was kind of talking to me about, and how much that can be applied in so many different aspects, not just us comparing research paper to theory, to previous theories and new theories, but also the shop floor leaders. I think a lot of the time in the safety 2 world, maybe we go, well, don't blame the worker, and then we end up just blaming the manager and the leader anyway. But the same thing applies to them as well. Like, don't blame the people, they're not the problem. That applies to the leaders as well. So put yourself in their shoes. So kind of local rationality for me was, when I heard him say that and I Googled it and worked out a little bit more, that was just a game changer for me, 100%.
Well, thank you very much. I know we're at the top of the hour, so I want to give it back to Carsten and Gary for a moment. And if people can stay 5 minutes extra, we'll stay open. But I just wanted to hand it off in case people have to go to watch time. Carsten and
Thanks, Tamara. Great. So I think to wrap up this session, and like I said, if anyone wants to stay on, we're on here. I typically like to end these things kind of like the 3 big takeaways that, Carsten, you would like to leave people with. What would be those big 3 things?
Well, I think the first one we've discussed now quite extensively, but it's worth repeating local rationality once more. I think that's probably the one thing I hope people take with them and reflect on, and maybe, as James said, read up a bit on it. And there are some super interesting cases around also where you wouldn't expect them. Just one example that I saw quite recently in a Dutch newspaper was a column by a philosopher of all people, who commented on the riots that had been in the Netherlands because of the lockdown, that they had this curfew, which is now overturned. And there were really harsh reactions on the riots, and surely there happened things there that are not okay. People demolishing stuff and then setting fire to stuff, etc. But just to say, okay, that those are barbarians and idiots and they should be locked up and best in Siberia, that doesn't address the underlying issues. This philosopher said it's actually important to try to understand, because for these people, there's probably a good reason to behave why they behave like they do, even if you don't share their worldview and don't understand why they do. So that's the one thing that I think that everybody should take with them. The second thing is, well, what put me on study Heinrich, apply some critical thinking. Don't take thing just for a good fish because some big writer says something. Don't agree with me either. Just well, be welcome to read my books, but well, be critical about it, because I am biased too. Of course, everybody is. So explore stuff, and then if you have the possibility, go back to the source.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for those 3 points here. Tamara, I'll let you close up the session then for us.
Well, thank you, everybody. That's another edition of Meeting the Author. It was a great conversation. It was just awesome to have everybody choose to spend their time with us today and be in this discussion. So thank you very much for carving out some time in your day to join us. It really does mean a lot to us to see the community come together like this. Thank you. Thank you very much.